Hi everyone, it's Kimmer, the study abroad specialist. In today's video, I'm going to be doing a walkthrough of ISFAA. So ISFAA is the International Student Financial Aid Application. This is the application that students who want to come to the US from other countries to study abroad will need to fill out if you are seeking any type of financial aid. And so in the past, I did a video on my channel where I was talking about ISFAA in general, covering what it was and how to get started. And from that particular video, I've had questions from students asking, can you do an actual walkthrough of the application? So that's what we're going to do. The walkthrough starts right now. Okay, everyone. So we are on the ISFAA form here. And so one important thing to know about ISFAA is that even though this is what we consider the standard form, you will find that some schools have their own version of the form. So as I've been going through and looking at certain schools, I found that some of them have their own format. So you just want to look out for that. Now, in general, the instructions should just be the same, but that's another thing to know, that every school may have their own individual instructions. So what I'm going to do is walk you through each part of the form here. And on the standard form, there are 5 different pages. So you want to be very clear because they are asking for specific things on each page. So the first thing to know is we are going to start right here at the top. You will notice that there is an instruction here to say that you need to return this form to the college that provided it. So what you need to understand about this is that every single school, even if they are using this standard form, that you have to return it specifically to the college that provided it to you. So the way that it works is basically when you are going through and applying for any school in the US and you ask them about ISFAA, most of them are very familiar with it. They will be able to send you that form and you need to send back the form that the particular school provided. So let's say you're applying to UC Berkeley. You're going to need to send back UC Berkeley's form that they provided to you for the ISFAA. Now, if it's just the standard form, that's perfectly fine. But if they have it in their own format, for example, you need to make sure you are filling out their particular form. So just be clear on that. You are also not returning this form to the college board or not to any other entity except for the school that it provided it to you. So one important thing to know that I always tell students about anything in life is to make sure that you are going through and clearly reading the directions. Now, we are going to go through everything today for this particular form. But again, as I said, if a school has a different form or a different version of the form, you want to make sure that you are clear about what is being asked of you. Now, one of the things that I do have is a freebie for you that you can access by clicking in the description box. So with this, it's going to be an annotated version of this particular form where I've gone through and I've made some specific notes about things that may be a little bit different for international students in the way that we phrase things here in the US, or certain things that may be asked of you that you may not have thought about. So I've gone through and made some notes on that particular form. I think it'll be useful for you just to kind of get an idea. So as you're going through and filling out your forms, you will say, okay, I'm familiar with that. I understand what that means. And I've done that so that it can be a little bit more useful for you in a way to get some ways of understanding what certain questions might mean or what they might be asking. So we start here with the actual instructions. And so a couple things to note on this for this standard form and for most parts of the ISFAA that you're going to fill out. Number one, you need to definitely do this. So you need to answer all questions that apply to you and your family. So what I always like to say to students is it's better to answer something thinking that it doesn't. I mean, maybe it's something that you're like, yeah, I don't know if we have that, rather than to leave it out, because you want to make sure that you're getting the most for what you can. So if it's something where you're like, I don't know how much an asset is, I'm just guesstimating, maybe your parents they haven't gone through and thought about that. You want to make sure that you're doing that, but it's better to give more information than to give less information, particularly when it comes to financial aid. I know this is something that a lot of American students struggle with, is that they feel that if they list everything, then they're not going to qualify for certain things. You do not want to do that. Number one, it's dishonest. Number two, also as well, you don't know what the school is using to factor it. Again, the thing about the ISFAA is that it's completely different from a lot of other types of financial aids, for example, that Americans would get, where it's like you don't know what the school is using to say this person qualifies for aid. So you never want to go through and assume. So that way you need to make sure that you are including every single thing that may apply to you and your family. The next thing to know is that for the standard form and for most of the ISFA forms, whether the school has done their own formatted version or whether you're using this one, is that you need to be able to convert all currency figures to US dollars before putting them on the form. So what they're going through and doing is they're looking at this particular form as a US standard form. So everything that they're looking at in terms of the figures, we're going to get into that in a little bit, is going to be seen through US dollars. So you just want to go through and make sure that you are converting that from your home currency to US dollars. It just makes it a lot easier. Again, they're getting hundreds, sometimes thousands of these forms from international students. They don't have time or the bandwidth of people to go through and convert all of this. So that's why they ask you to do that. And again, you can easily find a currency converter online. I'm going to link below my favorite one, Oanda, which I've used for many, many years, but there are so many online and probably on your phone as well. So just make sure that you're going through and doing that. And last but not least, I've already talked about it, but make sure that you are returning the form directly to the college that provided it or requested it from you. So definitely do that. Now, on this particular form, as I mentioned, it is 5 pages long. And so there are different sections here. So we're going to go A through E. So in section A, it's going to be all about you, your student information, which is basically how they're going to get familiar with you. They've already gotten your application to the school, but they're going to get familiar with your particular financial situation. In section B, we have your parents' information. So this is going to be particularly important with the exception of if you are an adult student. I know that there are some students out there who are coming to study in the US who are full-grown adults. You've been out in the real world working for 10, 15 years. You don't necessarily have to put that, but a larger group of students who are usually going to be coming for undergrad or maybe graduate students, you are definitely going to still need to put your parents' information on there. And they give you specific ideology and certain information rather about what that actually means. So in America, what does it mean when they say parents, custodial parents, guardian, et cetera, et cetera. So go through and make sure that you read that clearly. On section C, what you're going to find is it's all about what is going to be required for the documentation. So this is going to be what you're going to have to require to be shown to actually show that you are eligible potentially for aid. And so this is the financial information. In section D, you have asset information. One of the things I always like to highlight is that financial information is different from asset information. So you want to think about financial information as what is current right now. How much do you have in your bank account? How much do your parents have in their bank account? Meaning like liquid, able to access right now. Asset information is more or less still part of financials, but it's looking at more like things like your housing, so your parents' house, or even if you own some type of property, stocks, bonds, different things like that, which are not necessarily liquid, but are in your control, within your possession, within your particular long-term finances. Last but not least, in section E, you have expenses. So this is really looking at the output of how much things are going to cost while you're in the United States and how much you're currently spending on things. So to kind of start with section A here, and you'll see that it lists confidential right here. Basically what this means is this is only going to be viewed by people internally within the particular school. So it's not something that's going to be posted out. I mean, hopefully not. There's not a breach of contract. Usually there's not. Schools in the US particularly take this very seriously. So unless it's going to be someone that is within the administration of the school or within the financial aid office, no one else is going to see this information. There's a big, big deal around that at schools here in the US. So you don't really have to worry. You can be as honest as possible. Again, as I mentioned before, make sure that you are being as clear and as honest as possible. So what you're going to do in section A is go through and fill out the student information. So one of the things you'll want to know is that with this particular form, there are some ways that you can do it by a PDF filler, or you can do it by hand, and your school will indicate how they want that. Typically, if you're doing it by hand, it needs to be in black or blue ink, and a lot of times you will need to write in capital letters. So you'll just want to note that, and also as well, you'll have to make sure that you're going through these boxes. I know they can be a bit tedious, but you'll want to make sure that you do that. If you have a longer name, I know that sometimes a lot of international students have much longer names than we do here in the US. You can just try and add it in, and then anywhere where you can't do that, just write it underneath so that they make sure and understand that it's a sort of a continuation. But for most students, it's not going to be an issue. So you want to make sure that you go through and do that, and then you're going to move to Number 2, your permanent address, which is most likely going to be your family's address in your home country. Your email address, make sure that you are clear about that. So make sure that it's an email that you actually check regularly. You don't just want to put a standard email on there. It's one that you check regularly, because that is typically where you're going to find out information. It's usually where they will send more information. Let's say you missed something or they need extra details. That's going to be the quickest way to find you, particularly as an international student. Your mailing address, your date of birth, you'll just want to note here that it, of course, is in the standard American style. So it's going to be month, day, year, not day, month, year, like in a lot of other countries. So make sure that you are clear about that. And then for number 6, just put your place of birth. So whatever country you were born in, be sure to write that. For number 7, countries of citizenship. Obviously, a lot of international students have dual or even triple citizenship. So you'll just want to make sure that you place those countries in here. If you do, let's say, have multiples, you can just put an apostrophe in one of the boxes and then move on to the next one to make sure that you're being clear about the different countries. For the expected visa type, for most students, you are going to be on the F1 visa as a student. If, let's say, you are in the country on a different visa, you may also want to just write a small note about that. I can also show you later in the form where you can write about that specifically to explain your situation. But for most students, it's going to be the F1 visa for coming to the US to study. When do you expect to begin your studies? Just go ahead and put a rough estimate. For some students, I know that maybe you are just planning in the future and you're like, hey, I'm still a year out. Just go ahead and put that here for the month and the year, just so they kind of understand if you are doing, basically what they're looking at is whether you're doing a fall intake or a January intake. Now, that does not necessarily mean that you would get less aid either way, but they need to prepare for that. A lot of students tend to actually, this is a little bit of a secret here, get a little bit more aid in the spring semester because there are less students starting overall. So just kind of keep that in mind, but it doesn't necessarily matter either way. It depends on your school, but just make sure that you're clear about that. Will you be attending? So you'll put here if you are going to be coming to a college or university for the first time, if you're transferring, or if you are a returning student. So this is important to note as well, that you will need to do this every single year that you are in school. It's very similar here in the US. We have a similar form that a lot of students have to fill out every single year. So just kind of know that. And then what you want to do here is put the names of the schools, at least A through F, of the ones that you are applying to. Now, again, each individual school is not necessarily comparing, and they're not necessarily taking notes and being like, hey, let me call this other school and see what they're doing. They just want to kind of get an idea of how many schools you're applying to, but it's not necessarily going to impact your aid. It's just to get an idea of what is actually going on here as they go through and process it. And then you'll want to put your marital status as well. Oops. You want to put your marital status. I'm just going to make this a little bit smaller here. Hold on one second. This is live demoing, so it happens. So let me just go. Yeah, okay, we're back where we need to be. So you'll just want to put your marital status down here, and whatever that is for you, just be sure to check that. The one important thing to know is that if you are married, how many people financially are dependent on you. You'll just want to be clear about that. And if it's just yourself, then just put 0, 1 here. So for sections B and C, I'm going to start with section B, but B is all about your parents. So it's very standard stuff. You're going to put in your parents' names, so starting with parent 1, parent 2, what their age is, what their address is, occupation, title, employer, number of years employed, and then you're going to put some information about their education. Again, this is just to kind of get a overall picture of thinking and connecting the dots of what your parents do versus what type of aid you might need. Now, I know for a lot of students, you're like, hey, that's unfair. You know, like, I don't understand why that would be important. But what they're really trying to gauge is, for a lot of students, you know, even if, let's say, you come from a wealthier family, you may be in a situation where maybe you've been out on your own for a long time. You're not necessarily getting help. But what they're really trying to gauge is, are you someone who, are you going to be getting help from your parents who maybe own their own business? Or are you going to be someone that maybe your parents are low income workers and it's extremely low income compared to the US, wherever they are from. They're looking at all those things. So they need to see who you are as a total, and they need to see the overall picture of what your finances are going to look at. Because again, financial aid overall should be for students who really need it, and not for people who can, to be very frank, pay for it outright. We need to reserve it for people who actually need it. And so that's one of the things that they're really trying to gauge here. So again, be as honest as possible. And I will just say on that front that even if you are not being honest on here, there are ways of finding out. This is one of the things that people do all the time here in the US, where they go through and check and run people's information, their credit, and they will find out, and you will not be in a good place if they find that you were not telling the truth. So just make sure that you are being as honest as possible. Now for section C, this is really important because again, as I talked about earlier, this is your financial information. So one of the things that you will need to do is you will need to provide some receipts. So you're going to need to have the documentation to verify any income and asset information. Now, for a lot of people outside the US, you don't necessarily have tax forms. I know this is something that they put on here, but a lot of people outside the US don't have like tax day or anything like we have here every single year. So you may have some that you can get from your government, but it may be a lot different. So what a lot of international students tend to rely on are two different things here. They either tend to rely on their statement of information from their employer, or it could be a similar document that they get from their bank or other places to prove how much income they have. So whatever one is going to work best for you, make sure that you do that. And you're going to want to make sure that you're providing something that is within 90 days. So within 90 days of you actually filling out this form. So you don't want to, let's say if you are filling this out in June of 2023, you don't want to send them something that was taken from your bank in June of 2021. It needs to be within 90 days. That's the typical standard of how long you would have, because that's going to be fairly current unless you've gone through and just spent all your assets. So make sure that you do that. And then you're definitely going to want to highlight what the official exchange rate is. So just go ahead and it would be from whatever day you are filling this out or within the month of when you're filling it out. So whatever that is, so let's say you are coming from the UK and a pound sterling is going to be a pound 1.4 to the US dollar, whatever that is, just make sure that that's clear to them so that they can understand. Now, this note here, I've also highlighted this in the annotated version, but this question here for 19, does your government currently impose restrictions on the exchange and release of funds for study in the US? This is going to be individualized to every single country. One of the things that you can do is you can reach out to your country's consulate. So reach out to the consulate in from your country to figure that out, or whatever your equivalent of Department of Education or State Department is. So in the US here, we have a Department of Education and a State Department, and most countries have an equivalent of that. Go ahead and reach out to them to figure out that information, because there are some countries that do impose restrictions and hold the release of funds to study in the US particularly. And that goes back many years. There's lots of different politics around that for embargoes and different trading and all that. So you just want to understand what your country does so that you have a better idea of that. Do you have a source of emergency funds? This is going to be very important. Again, compared to a lot of other countries, let's say like in Europe, America does not have a lot of safety net to start with. And so particularly for people who are coming here to study, there's not necessarily going to be access to public funds or to healthcare or things like that. So you definitely want to show that you have emergency funds to study here in the US. And then you're going to go through and put all of your other information. So how will you pay for your transportation while you're in the US? There's some information about your household income, your family's household income for the particular year. For this one, they're looking at 2021. It's usually going to be about a year behind, just based on how we use all of our forms and all of our taxes. Everything is looking like a year or so behind. So it's not going to be, if you're filling out the 2023, 2024, it's not going to be looking at 2022. It's looking at 2021, and same thing moving forward. So in 2025, 2026, it'll be looking at 2022. So that's just how we do it here in the US. So you will definitely want to highlight that. Will there be a significant increase or decrease in your family's income the next year? You may not know that. Maybe your family is going to be coming into some money, or maybe someone got really big promotion, something like that. you will just want to kind of guesstimate. You and your family kind of know what's going on in your life. So just maybe guesstimate and figure out. You don't have to necessarily provide the amount, but if there is going to be a significant increase, you're going to be getting an inheritance, something like that, you definitely want to put that on there. Again, not necessarily saying that you won't be eligible for some type of aid, but that's going to help them determine if you are someone who would really qualify. For Section D, this is going to be more about the assets. So again, we talked about this before, where assets is more long-term, thinking about homes and property and stocks and bonds. So that's where you will put all of this information in here. Now for Section E down here, what you'll do is you will go through and specifically answer this question: how much did your family spend on the following expenses in 2021? And you will go through and just put the amounts again in US dollars. Now on here, if you have one, let's say that your family didn't spend anything, let's say on loan payments, you would not leave it blank, because one of the things that happens, particularly here in the US, when people are processing forms, is that if you leave it blank, they're assuming that you forgot about it. So you want to make sure that you are just putting 0, 0. So what you would do is you would put 0 here, right here in this spot, and then it would just zero it out. So 0.00 is already there, but make sure that you don't leave anything blank. Even if it doesn't apply to you, don't just leave it blank, because they'll just think that you forgot about it. So make sure you're not doing that. So you'll go through and fill all this out. One of the things as well is that if you have any type of debt, your families have debt, make sure you put the reason for debt. It could be school debt, it could be maybe mortgage debt, it could be any type of debt. Just make sure that you put that. And again, this is kind of looking, it's really more of a tricky way to see if there's any criminal activity. Most people do not have to worry about that, but you don't want to necessarily have like significant debt that you can't explain. So make sure that you are putting that in there and that they can understand that. Now for Section F, what you will do is this is going to be the expected support for educational expenses. So this is looking at what you're going to do is you're going to enter the expected amount of annual support towards your educational expenses. So this is looking at a 4-year plan, so particularly for undergrad, but also if you are even just doing for 2 years or 3 years, depending on what your program is, what type of educational support do you have? So do you have vacation savings? Do you have any assets yourself? Family income, family assets, friends and relatives, your government, because again, a lot of governments provide the ability for students to get scholarships or grants to come study in the US. Do you have any of that? Agencies and foundations, we've talked a lot about that in previous videos. Private sponsor, if you have that, all of that. So you want to go through, and even if, again, you don't have specific totals, what you can do, as it says here, is go through and estimate what you think that's going to be from each one. Same thing as over here. If it's going to be a 0, just make sure you put a 0 in this particular box and just do it all the way across so that they don't think that you just skipped it or you forgot about it. Now, if you are receiving any type of financial aid, either from a different entity in the US, maybe you want an independent scholarship to come to the US, or maybe you got it from your home government, you want to just put that here. So make sure that you're filling that out. Last but not least here, before we get to the signature, in Section G, you're going to want to make sure that this is where you can explain anything. So anything that you would want the committee to know as they're going through and reviewing it, whether it be about something about your family's debt, whether it be something about the particular visa that you might be on already if you're already here in the US, whether it's something about a specific circumstance of why you think that you should definitely be able to get more financial aid, use this space here. And one of the great things they encourage it as well, you'll see here, is that if you need more space, you can definitely go through and add additional sheets of paper so that you can clearly explain your situation. As I said before, it's much better to give them more information, really explain it, really dive into it, than to just make it completely vague so that they can understand what your situation is and where you're coming from so that you can get the aid that you need. Last but not least, and probably the most important, don't forget to certify it. You want to make sure that you are signing on the dotted line. Everyone who is involved needs to sign it. So signature of you, your parents, parent 1, parent 2, depending on if you have parent 1, parent 2, and then if you are married, make sure that your spouse signs it as well. There are spaces for these people throughout this form too, so just make sure that everything is sort of dotted, crossed, and complete before you submit. So as I mentioned in the video, there are some key things to know about ISFA. This is going to be a general rule just in life, but you need to make sure that you are reading the directions. Even though the application is a blanket application for the most part, some schools may have different instructions that they include. So you just want to make sure that you are following all of that, because again, since you need to apply to each school individually, there may be other things that they want you to submit that are not just based on the specific application requirements there. So you want to be clear about what your school is asking about. You also too want to make sure that you have filled in everything clearly and meticulously. So make sure that you've gone through and filled in everything. You don't want to get in a situation where you thought, oh, that doesn't apply to me, and then you actually skipped it. So again, it makes sense to read. And the other thing as well is to take your time on it, because there are certain elements that you may need to gather. Of course, you want to make sure that you are going to be converting everything into US dollars, and make sure that you have all of your ducks in a row before you actually go to submit. So that's why you want to give yourself enough time to be able to do it. If you have any other questions about ISFA, definitely go ahead and leave a comment below. And I want you to check out this video series if you are interested in learning how to study abroad in America. I will see you over there.